There are worlds where gods descend in light, cloaked in holiness and song. The orcs have no such luxury. Their gods come in smoke, in noise, in the spark that leaps from a shock attack gun just before it vaporizes its owner. They are not seen, but felt. The grin behind every explosion, the echo inside every skull that says, "Hit it harder." They have names, though even those sound like the punchline of a cosmic joke. Gork and Mork, the brutal one and the cunning one, the stomp and the sneer. Twin divinities of destruction who argue over who's bigger, and whose argument is the universe itself. To the orcs, this is holy truth. Gork hits you so hard you die. Mork hits you so hard you learn something. Between the two, all creation finds its rhythm. No cathedral honors them, no priest preaches their word. Their altars are battlefields, their sermons are detonations. Yet for all their savagery, belief in Gork and Mork is the closest thing the orcs have to philosophy, and perhaps the most honest religion in the galaxy. When an orc swings his choppa, he's praying. When he fires his gun, he's singing. And when he dies, grinning and bellowing his god's name, the echo of that sound births 1,000 more like him somewhere else. It is worship through continuity, resurrection through laughter. In the early days of Garuth's Reach, the sky turned the color of copper and fungus. Lightning stitched the horizon, green and white, and for 3 days it rained ash. The weird boys, those unstable conduits of the orcs' psychic field, began to shake and scream. Sparks burst from their eyes, their mouths, their scars. They weren't dying. They were listening. The Waaagh had grown loud enough to reach the immaterium, and something in the warp was laughing back. To witness a weird boy's trance is to see the border between madness and revelation blur to mist. He trembles, his veins glowing with green fire, his teeth sparking like broken circuitry. Around him, orcs cheer, offering bullets and teeth as sacrifices. The air thickens with ozone, metal hums like it's alive, and then, silence. Then comes the voice. It doesn't speak words. It hits. The weird boy convulses, howls, and slams his staff into the ground. The impact splits the soil. The other orcs fall to their knees, not out of reverence but instinct. The same way a predator bows to thunder. When it's over, the weird boy stands, smoke leaking from his mouth, and grins. Mork says we's going the wrong way. And without question, thousands of orcs turn around and march the other direction. Faith, to them, isn't trust. It's participation. The Imperium has long debated what Gork and Mork actually are. To the ecclesiarchy, they are demons, malignant warp entities born from collective barbarism. To the Mechanicus, they are an anomaly, a byproduct of psychic resonance too strong to ignore. To the Inquisition, they are heresy made flesh. But the orcs know better. They don't think about it. They feel it. Every Waaagh feeds the twin gods. Every cheer, every death, every ridiculous victory adds to their legend. The greater the noise, the closer the gods draw. When a Waaagh becomes large enough, when belief outweighs physics, the boundary between the real and the unreal burns away. And in that burning, the gods arrive. During the siege of Hive Myron on Garuth's Reach, Imperial Pict recorders captured something impossible. As the orc horde assaulted the Hive's walls, a storm gathered overhead. It wasn't weather. It was laughter. Deep, booming, felt through bone. The clouds churned into a face, enormous and crude, its tusks made of lightning, its eyes burning green. For 37 seconds, it hung there, watching. Then it grinned. Artillery fire vanished mid-flight, simply erased. Tanks exploded without being touched. Every orc screamed its name in unison. Gork! Some swore the second face appeared beside it, narrower, smirking. Mork, perhaps. Others said the two were one and the same, seen from different angles. A cosmic joke only the gods understood. When the storm faded, the hive was gone. Not bombed. Not melted. Gone. The battlefield remained, but the city had been erased from the timeline, scrubbed from memory, history, and orbit. No debris, no radiation. Just a flat expanse of green dust, and where it once stood, the orcs built a shrine made of skulls and tank treads. They painted it red, because red goes faster, and called it Da Smiley Place. It became the beating heart of the Waaagh, a living engine that roared even when no one touched it. Some said it was a fragment of Gork and Mork's laughter, frozen in matter. Others said it was simply noise made solid. Both were true. There's a line whispered among the orcs, half reverent, half warning. When you hear the gods laugh, keep fightin'. When they stop, you're already dead. Because the laughter is their pulse. The moment it fades, the Waaagh loses rhythm, and the orcs begin to turn on each other. Not out of despair, but out of boredom. Peace is poison. Quiet is death, so they keep moving, keep fighting, keep laughing, because the alternative is silence, and silence is the one thing Gork and Mork will not abide. Inquisitorial scholars sometimes speak of psychic saturation events, localized zones where reality thins under the pressure of mass belief. But what they fail to grasp is that orc belief is not persuasion. It doesn't convince reality, it bullies it. When enough orcs shout a thing, it becomes true. We's invincible. And suddenly they are. That fort's ours! And the walls collapse. That gun shoots fire! And now it does. Faith weaponized through laughter. Creation through punchline. It is absurd, and it works because it's absurd. The universe itself seems to find it funny. Even demons fear orc laughter. In the warp, where thought becomes form, humor is lethal. The orc's mirth has no irony, no introspection. It's pure force. The joy of smashing existence and finding it still smashes back. When demons approach a Waaagh, they are often torn apart not by psychic blades, but by contradiction. The orc's faith is too simple to corrupt. There's no pride to exploit, no temptation to offer. What could Slanesh whisper to a creature already content? What could Tzeentch bargain with something that doesn't care to win? Even the blood god only laughs, because in them, he recognizes his truest reflection. As the wall on Garuth's reach reached its peak, a phenomenon the Adeptus Astra Telepathica later termed the Green Pentecost occurred. Across the system, voices began to echo without mouths, laughter without lungs. Vox channels filled with sound that wasn't transmitted. It manifested. Astropaths bled from their eyes, muttering fragments of a single chant repeated in 1,000 dialects. Gork is Mork, Mork is Gork, they both stomp good. And when it ended, the stars above flickered, not dimmed, not died, but blinked. As if the cosmos itself had laughed along. No orc ever doubts their gods. No orc ever asks for proof, because proof is everywhere, in every explosion, every fight, every sound that makes the world shake. And if you stand on a battlefield long enough after they've passed, when the smoke is still thick and the ground still breathing, you can sometimes hear it too. A low chuckle rolling through the ruins. The sound of something vast and amused. The laughter of gods who never stop fighting because the fight is the only prayer that matters. No one truly understands the mech boy, not even the orcs. They appear when the Waaagh grows loud enough. Born fully formed, covered in grease, already arguing with reality. Their minds are loud in ways that even weird boys fear. Where others see metal, they see potential. Where others see wreckage, they hear whispers of impossible machines begging to be made. The orcs believe their mechs are blessed by Gork and Mork. One god for the punch, one for the plan. And maybe they're right, because somehow the madness works. When Garuth's reach turned into a forge world of fungus and smoke, the mech boys awoke like thunder after lightning. They crawled out of the soil carrying tools they'd never seen before but already knew how to use. Wrenches the size of swords, welding guns that screamed. Sparks danced in the air around them like fireflies made of electricity. Every mech spoke to himself, muttering equations no human mind could follow, scrawling blueprints on the air with their fingers. The others gathered around them, watching in awe, not understanding, but believing. That belief was enough to fuel miracles. One mech, known only as Big Grib, decided to build a machine that could shoot a planet into space and hit something good. No one told him it was impossible. Orcs don't understand that word. They just nodded, handed him scrap and started hammering too. Within days, a mountain of metal began to take shape. It didn't look like a weapon. It didn't look like anything. It just felt right. The sound of their work became the heartbeat of the Waaagh. Hammers, engines, laughter, an orchestra of chaos and creation. Sparks rained like green stars. Smog turned the sky black. Even the ground seemed to hum with approval. And when Big Grib finally pulled the lever, the mountain roared. The blast flattened everything for kilometers. The projectile never landed. It simply vanished into orbit, leaving behind a crater that glowed for days. The orcs cheered, coughing through the smoke. It worked. Grib screamed, and no one doubted him, because in their world, belief is proof. The mech boy's dream isn't invention. It's expression. They don't build because they need machines. They build because silence is unbearable. They hammer to think, weld to pray, and explode to celebrate. Their workshops are nightmares of physics. Pipes leading nowhere, gears spinning air, fuel lines feeding into voids that shouldn't exist. Yet somehow every contraption fires, flies, or explodes exactly when it's supposed to. The Adeptus Mechanicus have dissected captured mech tech for centuries, and every attempt ends the same way: confusion, awe, and death. One Magos famously declared, "These devices defy the Omnissiah's design." Moments later, the orc gun he was studying fired by itself, reducing his laboratory to dust. His final words were recorded in binary static. Perhaps the Omnissiah laughs. That's the difference. The Imperium reveres its machines as sacred relics, preserved and obeyed. The orcs treat theirs like jokes, things to hit, fix, and love in equal measure. The Mechanicus whispers prayers to their machines. The orcs yell at theirs until they work. Both approaches succeed, but only one is fun. As Gorzag Dakatif's Waaagh spread across Garuth's reach, the mech boys turned their world into a living foundry. The rivers ran black with oil, forests melted into scrapyards, and the sky was a permanent orange haze. The mechs worked without rest, fueled by fungus beer and divine inspiration. Some built guns that fired other guns. Others built aircraft that never landed because they didn't know how to stop. The orcs didn't care. The louder the machine, the holier it was. A group of mech boys, drunk on fumes and glory, decided to build a walking fortress. They called it a gargant, though no one knew why. The word simply appeared in their heads. Day and night, they welded and bolted, screaming at each other over the noise. When it was finished, it towered over the horizon, a monstrosity of rust and rivets, its head shaped like a crude orc skull. Its eyes burned green. Its heart, if it had one, beat in time with the Waaagh. When it took its first step, the world shook. When it fired its first gun, half the valley vanished. The mechs danced around it, weeping with joy. "It's beautiful," one cried, moments before being crushed under its foot. The others laughed, not out of cruelty but pride. His death was proof the machine worked. From orbit, Imperial observers watched in disbelief as the gargant walked across continents. It was not a weapon. It was a sermon, a declaration that imagination itself had teeth. The Waaagh's psychic field grew stronger with every clang and spark. Weird boys began to see visions of impossible machines floating through the warp, constructs made of pure laughter and lightning. They described them as the dreams of the gods, glimpses of what Gork and Mork built when they weren't arguing. The mech boys took these visions seriously. They built what they saw. Some of their creations were useless. Others were divine. There was the boom-da-booma, a cannon that fired noise instead of shells, a shockwave of sound so intense it liquefied stone. There was the truckapult, a catapult that launched trucks carrying more catapults. And then there was Da Shock Tunnel, a machine that punched holes in reality, teleporting orcs into enemy lines. Sometimes inside enemy tanks, sometimes inside the sun. Either way, the mechs considered it a success. They didn't measure progress in safety. They measured it in laughter. For the orcs, the mech boy represents everything sacred about chaos. Creation without thought, invention without fear. Each one is a prophet of motion, hearing divine inspiration in the roar of engines. To them, the universe is a toy box, and the laws of physics are just daft suggestions. They are the dreamers of destruction, and through them, the Waaagh learns how to breathe in vacuum, how to fly through storms, how to survive being blown up. When Gorzag visited one of their forges, the mechs swarmed him like children showing off drawings. Boss, look at this thing! Shoots lightning out of a squig's bum." Gorzag nodded, unimpressed. "Make it red," he said. They did. It fired faster. That's the beauty of their world. Simplicity that bends reality. They never doubt. They never fail. Even failure is a kind of victory. The day the mech boys built the Cruza of Kunin, they transcended even their gods' expectations. It began as a joke, an argument about who could make a ship faster than light without using that warp nonsense. They spent weeks hammering, welding, and shouting. When they were done, they had something that looked less like a ship and more like a mountain with rockets glued on. It shouldn't have moved. It shouldn't have existed. When the mechs hit the ignition, the Cruza screamed, a sound so loud it was heard in the void itself. It didn't jump into the warp. It tore through it, leaving a green trail that lingered for decades. Imperial astropaths described it as a scar in the immaterium shaped like laughter. The mechs simply said, "Told you it'd work." For months afterward, faint echoes of orc engines were detected light years away. Ships that shouldn't be there. Weapons that fired across impossible distances. The Imperium couldn't track them. The mechs couldn't explain them. But they didn't care. They were already building the next one. To an orc, technology is instinct. To the galaxy, it's a nightmare. Every invention spreads like infection. Copied, reimagined, multiplied. When one mech dreams, 10,000 others wake up with the same idea. That's how the orcs advance without realizing they've advanced. They are evolution with a wrench. And deep down, in the psychic hum that binds them, their gods watch with pride. Gork, the brutal hammer. Mork, the cunning spark. Each invention is a prayer to both, half madness, half miracle. When a mech shouts, "Oi, it's workin'," you can almost hear the universe sigh. Of course it is. The mech boy's dream has no end. It doesn't aim for perfection or purpose. It only wants more. More noise, more guns, more reasons to laugh. That hunger drives the Waaagh forward, fueling the cycle of destruction that never sleeps. Because for every orc who dies in battle, 100 new ones rise from the smoke, ready to build, ready to break, ready to believe. And when the machines of the Waaagh thunder to life, when the sky turns green and the stars flicker under the weight of their laughter, the universe remembers the oldest truth of all. Nothing is more dangerous than imagination with a trigger. Every Waaagh needs a voice loud enough to drown out the rest. Among the orcs, leadership is never given. It is taken, beaten into existence through volume, muscle, and charisma measured in decibels. A warboss is not chosen because he is wise or skilled or destined. He becomes one because he refuses to be ignored. The warlord is born the moment his roar silences 1,000 others. It is not politics. It is gravity. On Garuth's Reach, that gravity had a name, Gorzag Dakatif. His legend began before anyone realized he was alive. While other orcs grew from the muck and confusion, Gorzag stood already armed, already laughing. His first act was to punch a knob so hard the sound echoed across the valley. His second was to shout, "That's my noise now!" The others agreed immediately because agreement felt right when shouted at by something that large. Gorzag didn't build his Waaagh the way a human general builds an army. He didn't issue orders or draw maps. He simply walked and the planet followed. Every orc within earshot of his voice felt their blood vibrate to his rhythm. The louder he grew, the more they changed around him. Stronger, faster, meaner. His presence was psychic contagion. Belief solidified into hierarchy. He was proof that leadership among the orcs is not command but resonance. The loudest heartbeat becomes the world's drum. Under his rule, if it could be called rule, Garuth's Reach transformed. The endless scrap cities became one vast machine, groaning and living beneath green skies. Mechs clanged through the smoke, stomping to the rhythm of their warlord's laughter. Engines howled like beasts as the mechs forged new monstrosities in his name. Trucks made from tanks, tanks made from hab-blocks, planes welded from the bones of titans. None of it should have worked, but Gorzag's belief was infectious. He said it would, and so it did. Even the world itself began to move differently. Thunder rolled when he laughed. Rivers changed direction when he shouted. But power, even for orcs, is a burden. Not because it brings responsibility. Gorzag had none. But because it brings attention. Every orc dreams of being the biggest, the loudest, the one whose shadow stretches across the stars. And when they see someone else holding that dream, they want to take it. Gorzag understood this. He encouraged it. Every challenge was another chance to prove himself alive. The duels began as entertainment. Then they became ritual. Orcs came from every corner of the planet to fight him, each convinced they'd be the one to take his title. They all failed. Gorzag fought like the world itself had taught him how, with fists that hit like falling fortresses and laughter that cracked the air. When he crushed a rival, he'd roar, "Now you's part of me!" And the crowd would cheer because somehow it was true. The orc psychic field absorbed their belief, their awe, their fear, and fed it back into him. Each victory made him physically larger, his muscles bulging with the faith of his followers. By the third month of the Waaagh, Gorzag was enormous, a mountain in motion. His armor was a cathedral of rivets and fire, his jaw plated in bronze teeth carved from the hulls of Imperial tanks. He carried a weapon so massive it needed its own name, Da Argument. It was part hammer, part gun, part unexplained miracle. When it fired, the world flinched. To the Imperium, he was a walking apocalypse. To the orcs, he was a messiah who didn't need to promise anything. He simply was. His charisma was thunderous, his simplicity divine. "We fight 'cause we's alive!" he'd shout, and a million voices would echo back, "Waaagh!" For the orcs, that was enough theology to live and die by. The human defenders who faced him described his army as a living storm. The orcs didn't advance in ranks or waves. They rolled, a green tide that smashed against defenses until the defenses became part of it. Every trench, every fortress, every tank swallowed whole into the moving organism of war. Gorzag didn't need plans. The Waaagh itself was instinctual strategy. Each orc a neuron in a single screaming brain. But even storms have patterns. Gorzag had one rule. The louder, the better. Noise was holy. Silence was treason. His mech boys competed to make weapons that screamed, roared, or sang when fired. His weird boys turned psychic lightning into percussion. When his fleet launched into orbit, it didn't do so quietly. It erupted, hundreds of ships belching flame and laughter, the void echoing with their hymn, "Red uns go fasta." From space, Garuth's Reach looked alive. Its surface pulsed with green energy, like veins under diseased skin. The Orks were not just on the planet anymore. They were part of it. When Gorzag decided it was time to leave, the planet almost seemed to shudder in relief, or grief. The construction of his flagship, Dadaka Moon, was chaos incarnate. It began as a cluster of asteroids welded together with plasma torches and willpower. Orks filled every crevice with guns, engines, banners, and bad ideas. Mechs argued, fought, and occasionally exploded. But the project moved forward anyway. Gorzag never asked how it worked. He just kept shouting, "More Daka!" until someone gave it to him. When Dadaka Moon finally ignited its engines, it wasn't supposed to move. It wasn't even symmetrical. It rotated on its own axis, shedding debris like rain. But it did move. The void itself seemed to part in front of it, unwilling to test the Orks' belief. It wasn't a ship. It was a world that had decided to fly. From its decks, Gorzag looked down on the burning planet below. He didn't feel pride because Orks don't feel pride. He felt momentum, that primal joy of motion, of progress without direction. "We's going up there," he said, pointing to the nearest star. "Looks punchable." The fleet roared in agreement. But leadership among the Orks is not a throne. It's a tightrope made of gunfire. Gorzag's power attracted challengers even in orbit. Knobs whispered. Mechs plotted. Weird boys saw visions of betrayal and laughed at them like a joke waiting to be told. Gorzag didn't fear it. He needed it. Conflict kept the blood flowing, and the blood kept the Waaagh alive. When a rival war boss, Krug Skullcrusher, tried to take control of the fleet, Gorzag led him. For an hour, Krug strutted across the command deck, shouting orders, slapping Gretchen, pretending he was in charge. Gorzag watched, silent, then stood up. His shadow swallowed Krug whole. "You done?" he asked. Krug hesitated just long enough for Gorzag to swing Da argument. There was no body left, just a crater in the floor and a new lesson carved into the fleet's hierarchy. Ambition was allowed, but only if you could survive it. Gorzag didn't hate his challengers. In a way, he loved them. Each was proof that his example worked. Every Ork wanted to be him, and that meant the wall would never stop growing. His enemies kept him alive. The burden of the warlord wasn't leadership, it was momentum. If he ever stopped fighting, the whole system would collapse. He carried the Waaagh not like a crown, but like a disease that demanded movement. That movement took him across the stars. Gorzag's fleet smashed through shipping lanes, obliterated mining colonies, and shattered entire moons. Every victory fed the myth. Even Imperial propaganda couldn't keep up. They started naming him in official bulletins, as though acknowledging him might slow him down. It didn't, it only made him realer. Words have power, and every terrified whisper of Gorzag Dakatif in a command bunker somewhere in Segmentum Obscurus made him grow just a little bit bigger. There was no strategy, no grand plan, only the horizon and the next thing to hit. That was enough. Yet even in his endless laughter, there were moments when the burden pressed down. When the guns went quiet between battles, when the fires dimmed, Gorzag would sit alone on the bridge of his impossible ship. The stars stretched out before him, cold and distant. In those rare silences, he would frown. Not from doubt, but from confusion. He could feel something deep inside him stirring, something older than any fight, a whisper that said the laughter wasn't his alone. He'd look at his hands, massive, scarred, trembling with power, and mutter, "Oi, Gork? Mork? Which one of yous am I?" The ship would creak, the engines hum, and somewhere in the hull, the sound of muffled laughter would echo back. He'd grin again, forgetting the question. The warlord's burden is not knowing. It's never needing to. When the next world appeared on his scanners, he pointed at it and shouted, "Dat one!" And the fleet turned like a single living thing. The laughter rose again. The stars grew smaller. The guns heated up, and in the space between galaxies, where the warp hums with the echoes of every thought ever screamed into the void, something vast and unseen smiled. The laughter of the gods rolled through eternity, carried on the back of a single Ork's roar. The Waaagh had a leader. The galaxy had a headache, and Gorzag Dakatif had found what passed for peace among his kind. Not in silence, not in victory, but in the endless noise that kept the universe from remembering how to sleep. For the Imperium of Man, the Orks are a plague without pattern, a madness that breeds in the cracks between stars. Yet for every fortress that falls, for every world that burns, it is the humans who remain to count the cost. To the Orks, war is joy. To the Imperium it is obligation, duty, fear wrapped in faith. And when the green tide comes, that faith is tested not in cathedrals, but in trenches soaked with ash. On the world of Vandros, they heard the Waaagh long before they saw it. The airships above the manufactorums trembled as the low thunder of engines rolled across the plains. The Vox crackled with static, laughter buried beneath frequencies too deep to be mechanical, and in every hive, banners of the Aquila fluttered like prayers against a storm. The people of Vandros had been told the Orks were beasts, disorganized and stupid, but when they came, the sky itself changed color. Lieutenant Kyle Brenner, of the 212th Harrowborn, remembered the first bombardment like a fever dream. He had seen sieges before, cult uprisings, Xeno raids, even the firestorms of the Tyrannid war zones, but the Orks were different. They didn't attack with precision. They attacked with personality. When their first shells hit, the sound wasn't explosion. It was laughter. Voxcasters on every channel filled with mocking echoes that seemed to come from inside their helmets. And then came the ground shake. Hundreds of crude trucks barreling across the plains, their armor daubed in red and black, their guns blazing without aim. Brenner had expected chaos. Instead, he saw rhythm. Every Ork moved like part of a song the humans couldn't hear. The guard fought with discipline. Laser guns flared, artillery pounded, orders screamed through the smoke. But for every Ork that fell, 3 more seemed to appear from the ground itself. The air tasted of fungus and metal. Every wound infected, every corpse twitched. The Orks weren't an army. They were a climate. By nightfall, the trenches were half gone. Brenner stood knee-deep in blood and rain, shouting over the roar of a burning chimera. "Hold the line!" he yelled. No one heard him. The green tide had swallowed the sound. In the command bunker below the hive, Magos Lyria and her acolytes monitored the Auspex arrays. She'd been studying Ork biology for months, trying to map their genetic contagion. "They are not an infestation," she said softly to the commissar beside her. "They are adaptation." The commissar, a stone-faced man named Rin, spat on the floor. "Call it what you like, Magos. I call it heresy." But even he couldn't deny what the sensors showed. The Orks weren't just invading Vandros. They were changing it. The forests near the landing zones had turned green-black overnight. The rivers foamed with spores. Even the air shimmered with strange energy fields. Lyria's servo skull recorded the data until it shorted out from overload. "They are terraforming," she whispered. "No, not terraforming. Orkiforming. The planet is becoming one of them." Rin drew his bolt pistol. "Then we burn it." She didn't answer. She was already watching the screens, mesmerized by the pulsing lights that formed patterns too deliberate to be random. The Waaagh wasn't just an invasion. It was communication. A living signal spreading through matter and mind alike. On the front lines, the Astra Militarum made their stand at Hive Tarsus. Thousands of guardsmen formed firing lines along the Manufactorum causeways. Overhead, Valkyries screamed through the clouds, dropping flares that burned green against the fog. Brenner watched as the Ork horde surged forward, a wall of muscle and metal that glowed like wildfire. "Emperor preserve us," someone whispered beside him. He didn't answer. The Orks didn't need preservation. They needed audience. The first contact shattered the front. Orks slammed into the defensive lines with the sound of thunderclaps. They laughed as they died, as if every wound was proof the universe was still paying attention. Brenner fired until his lasgun melted in his hands, then grabbed a fallen trooper's chainsword and swung until his arms gave out. Every time he cut one down, another leapt onto the pile, grinning. It wasn't battle anymore. It was performance. When the walls fell, Brenner and what remained of his platoon retreated into the hive's lower levels. The Orks followed, howling through the tunnels like beasts in a feeding frenzy. But even down there, in the flickering dark, something strange happened. The Orks stopped laughing. They moved slower, less certain. Away from the surface, away from the sound and the sky, they seemed smaller. That's when Brenner realized the truth. The Orks weren't unstoppable. They were dependent. The noise, the chaos, the movement, it fed them. Without it, they began to unravel. He whispered into his vox. "Silence them. Cut the noise." The counterattack was desperate, brutal, and brief. The guard detonated the hive's main reactors, flooding the upper levels with electromagnetic interference. The resulting pulse silenced every machine for 50 kilometers. No more engines, no more shouting, just silence. For a moment the Orks froze. Some dropped their weapons. Others blinked in confusion. The air went still. And then, the unthinkable. They began to argue. Without the shared psychic rhythm of the Waaagh, their unity fractured. Squabbles turned into brawls, brawls into massacres. The horde tore itself apart, unable to exist without the sound that bound it. Brenner watched from the ruins, trembling as the green tide devoured itself in silence. For the first time in months, he heard his own breathing. "Emperor," he whispered. "They don't just fight us. They fight to stay alive." It didn't last. When the power grid rebooted, when the hum of the machines returned, the noise came back, and with it, the laughter. The Orks rose again, their wounds already forgotten. The silence had starved them, but the noise fed them back to life. Within minutes, the horde reformed. Stronger, louder, angrier. By dawn, Hive Tarsus was gone. In orbit, Inquisitor Thalen received the last transmission from the planet. A blurred image of Gorzag Dakatif standing atop a mountain of corpses, shouting toward the sky. The words were unclear, but the tone was unmistakable. Triumph. Laughter. The signal cut out as the Inquisitor gave the order. Exterminatus. Fire rained from the heavens. The surface boiled. The hives melted into glass. In the silence that followed, Thalen closed his eyes and prayed. Let this be the end. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, long-range augers detected life signs. Green clusters blooming in the ash. The Orks had survived the cleansing fire, just as they always did. Their laughter returned first, faint, distant, echoing through the void. Then came the spores, carried by the wind. Then the noise. Laughter doesn't die easy. The report spread across the sector. Worlds fortified their defenses. The ecclesiarchy called for fasting and prayer. The Adeptus Mechanicus argued that the Orks were a symptom of the universe's entropy. Not an enemy to be destroyed, but a condition to be endured. But for the people on the ground, for the guardsmen, the miners, the refugees, the truth was simpler. The Orks weren't coming. They were always coming. They were part of the galaxy now, an immune system made of teeth and bullets. Every time humanity rebuilt, the Orks returned to remind them that creation without conflict was stagnation. For the Imperium, every victory was borrowed time. For the Orks, every defeat was fertilizer. On Vondros's scorched plains, months after the bombardment, a single guardsman named Brennar wandered through the silence. The world was dead, the air heavy with dust and regret, but somewhere beneath the soil, he felt the vibration. Soft, rhythmic, patient. He knelt, pressed his hand to the ground and whispered, "Not again." The earth pulsed once, twice, then, faintly, from below, laughter. Brennar closed his eyes. "Emperor, forgive us," he said. "They're laughing because they know they can't die." And beneath him, the green heartbeat of war began again. Everywhere the Orks go, they leave a scar. But in the grim dark of the far future, scars are how the galaxy remembers. To the Imperium, they are a contagion. To the Mechanicus, they are a paradox. But to the universe itself, the Orks are architects of chaos. Builders who construct through destruction. Gardeners who seed life through blood. They do not conquer worlds. They rewrite them. When the Waaagh lands, it begins as infection. Spores fall like rain, unseen and unstoppable, carried by smoke and wind. The soil darkens. The air grows thick. Machinery rusts in patterns that resemble veins. The planet begins to hum, its atmosphere vibrating with the psychic field of 1 billion greenskins dreaming in unison. Within weeks, mountains crack and cities tilt, drawn towards something greater. The rhythm of the Waaagh. On the industrial world of Kesarn, the change was visible from orbit. Forests of steel, once loyal to the Omnissiah, twisted into strange shapes. Manufactorums turned into living fortresses. Cranes bent themselves into giant idols. Conveyor belts moved with no power source. The Orks hadn't even arrived yet. Their idea had Magos Heliodre, watching from her orbital augury station, whispered to her servitors. It's not invasion. It's contamination of meaning. She didn't know how right she was. When the Orks finally came, they didn't burn the hives. They redecorated them. Gargants rolled through streets like gods in motion, and wherever they stepped, the architecture reshaped itself. Towers became battlements. Spires became cannons. Everything the Orks touched adapted to survive their touch. To humans, it was ruin. To Orks, it was home improvement. A tank graveyard became a city. Burned-out manufactorums became foundries. Even the ruined hab blocks began to sprout fungus, glowing faintly green at night like bioluminescent warnings. It wasn't rot. It was rebirth, crude, brutal, and alive. The Orks don't think of themselves as destroyers. They believe they're fixing the universe, making it louder, faster, more fun. Every explosion, every structure turned to scrap and reborn as something with more spikes, more guns, more personality. That's improvement. A mech boy on Kesarn was once heard shouting at a collapsing tower. "See? Works better that way." Moments later, it did. Inquisitor Thalen, orbiting the planet, wrote in his field log, "Every imperial world that falls to the Orks changes the same way. Not to ruin, but to rhythm. They turn everything alive. And the horror of it is that it works." He wasn't wrong. Studies of captured Ork worlds show atmospheric stabilization, growth of new biospheres, and a strange reduction in entropy. Systems that should collapse instead persist, powered by the self-replicating madness of the greenskin ecosystem. Even dead worlds bloom again under the green tide. The Orks don't terraform, they warform. Wherever they fight long enough, the planet itself becomes an engine of war, alive, hungry, self-repairing. The fungus absorbs toxins, purifies air, strengthens soil. Everything becomes fuel for more Orks. It is evolution written in gunpowder. When the Waaagh spreads across continents, the planet itself begins to pulse. Mountains rumble like heartbeats. Volcanoes belch smoke in time with battle drums. It's as if the world joins the fight, surrendering its natural laws to the Orks' psychic field. The Adeptus Mechanicus call this phenomenon geo-warp resonance. The Orks call it, "Da world gettin' proper fighty." Entire ecologies reshape themselves around this new energy. Squigs mutate into new forms to fit every niche. Flying squigs, swimming squigs, exploding squigs. Even squigs that act as living buildings. The ground teems with fungus that grows metal instead of roots. It feeds off sound, thriving in the chaos of constant battle. And when the fighting stops, it begins again on its own. The world becomes a perpetual motion machine of violence, self-sustaining, self-renewing, unstoppable. For the humans trapped on such planets, survival becomes a kind of religion. In the ruins of Kesarn's southern hemisphere, small enclaves of imperial citizens endured beneath the surface. They built shelters from rusted gargant armor, lit candles before old Aquilus, and prayed over the sound of distant explosions. Sister Lucienne, one of the last survivors of the Order of the Torch, wrote in her journal, "Every morning the sky screams. It's not pain, it's joy. I think they love this world more than we ever did." She wasn't wrong. The Orks did love it, in their own way. They shouted at the storms, painted the clouds, raced across the battlefields in machines that shouldn't move but did. They built, destroyed, rebuilt, and laughed through it all. And the strangest thing? The world laughed back. Months later, orbital augers detected seismic anomalies beneath the Ork strongholds. Something massive was moving under the crust. Not natural, not mechanical. The Orks didn't dig. The planet did. When it finally erupted, it wasn't magma that broke through, but machinery. A colossal structure the Orks had unknowingly grown out of their own chaos. It was neither fortress nor creature, but both. A walking continent forged from the remains of cities, bones, and dreams. The Orks roared with joy. "It's walkin'! We made a walkin' world!" The humans who saw it from orbit called it a sin against physics. The Orks called it da big stompa. It walked across oceans. It shouted as it moved, the sound of tectonic plates grinding into laughter. Every step created shockwaves, birthing new islands, new ecosystems. It was apocalypse turned creation. The war that builds worlds is the cruelest irony of all. The Orks destroy everything, yet what rises from the ashes thrives in their image. The universe rewards their chaos because it believes in it. The Orks don't plan for sustainability. They are sustainability. Each planet they ruin becomes a nursery for more. And when the Orks eventually leave, chasing the next fight, the worlds they've touched remain changed forever. Green fog lingers in the valleys. Spores drift through the air, waiting. In time, they grow again. Sometimes, decades later, the Imperium returns to reclaim these worlds. They find forests where there were deserts, rivers running red with strange minerals, new species feeding on old wreckage, and somewhere in the wind, faint and echoing, the sound of laughter. The Mechanicus records them as recovered biospheres. The Ecclesiarchy calls them blasphemous miracles. But the truth is simpler. They're Ork worlds now, alive, loud, and waiting to wake. At the edge of the segmentum obscurus, one such world, once imperial, now entirely Orkoid, spun silently under a red sun. Its surface glowed faintly green, its mountains shaped like fists raised toward the sky. Deep beneath its crust, the core pulsed in rhythm with something greater, a signal calling across the void. In the warp, that signal was not static. It was laughter. Every planet they touched added to the chorus. Every Ork born on those worlds carried a memory of soil that fought back, of stars that trembled when they shouted. The Waaagh was not conquest anymore. It was evolution's masterpiece, and somewhere, perhaps even the Emperor of Mankind might have felt it. A vibration through the golden machinery of the throne. the faint hum of the galaxy itself remembering how to laugh. Because war, once begun, never truly ends. It only changes shape, and no one understands that better than the Orks, the green gardeners of apocalypse, the builders of forever ruin. The galaxy has forgotten what peace sounds like. Empires rise, burn, and rebuild themselves atop the bones of old wars. But through it all, one sound never fades, the echo of the Waaagh. It hums in the void between stars, in the static of every Vox transmission, in the trembling of worlds about to die. For the Orks, eternity isn't a dream. It's an accident that keeps happening. There is no first Waaagh. There was never a beginning. The greenskin tide didn't start as a species or a culture. It began as a vibration in the universe, a pulse of pure intent that found flesh to carry it. In every age, in every corner of space, it reappears, wearing new armor, new scars, new laughter. The Imperium records them as separate invasions. The Ulanor Crusade, the War for Armageddon, the fall of Gazkul's empire, the burning of Mordaka. But these are not events. They are verses in one endless song. To understand the Orks' immortality, you must understand their simplicity. They do not fear death because they do not believe in it. Death, to them, is simply movement in another direction, an excuse to grow louder somewhere else. When one Ork dies, his body feeds the spores that birth hundreds more. His weapons rust into soil that breeds squigs. His laughter lingers in the psychic field, waiting for ears to hear it again. In 1,000 ways, every Ork's death is a seed, and every seed eventually laughs. Long after the Imperium declared the Kesarn sector purged, long after its sun dimmed and its worlds were glassed by orbital bombardment, a new green light bloomed. It began as a single fungus patch in the ruins of a manufactorum, feeding on irradiated soil. Within a week, it covered a continent. Within a month, it stood up. The first Orks of the reborn Waaagh staggered into the light, blinking like newborn gods. They had no memory of their predecessors, yet their hands knew how to hold weapons. Their voices carried the same rhythm. Their laughter fit the same key. The cycle had begun again. The Mechanicus called it biological persistence. The Ecclesiarchy called it heresy reborn. The Orks called it Tuesday. Inquisitor Thalen, the same man who had once ordered exterminatus on Vandros, lived long enough to see his sin return. He stood aboard a battlecruiser orbiting the newly green planet, his face pale beneath the glow of the auspex. "I burned this world," he whispered. "I watched it die." His attendant, a young savant named Corin, adjusted the readings. "Then, my lord, it appears death was not sufficient." Thalen stared into the holographic projection, the surface alive again, crawling with green. The laughter reached them even here, faint but steady, like heartbeats transmitted through space. "You don't kill war," he said quietly. "You just give it new reasons to laugh." On the surface, the Orks built fast. They always do. Within days, the plains were filled with ramshackle fortresses, engines belching smoke, banners of crude red and black flapping in the wind. Each structure was alive, powered not by fuel or design, but by the belief of the Orks who hammered it together. And in the center of it all stood the biggest of them, the Warlord reborn. He had no name yet, but his teeth glowed silver in the sunlight, and his laughter rolled across the world like thunder. Some said it was Gorzog Dakatif returned, rebuilt from memory and myth. Others said it didn't matter. A Waaagh doesn't need history. It needs volume. Under his gaze, the new mech boys began their sacred work, building machines that remembered how they had once killed a sun, engines that hummed with ghosts of their predecessors. Every clang of metal was a hymn, every explosion a heartbeat. The Orks didn't know they were repeating the past. They didn't care. To them, repetition was glory. In orbit, the Imperial fleet prepared to fire again. 1,000 ships aimed their lances, ready to scorch the planet a second time. The fleet master, Admiral Voss, hesitated. His hands trembled above the command seals. "Do it," Thalen ordered. "Sir," Voss said, voice low, "what if it doesn't work?" Thalen looked at the hologram, at the laughing world below, and smiled bitterly. "It won't. But we'll remind them we're still here." The bombardment began. Fire rained once more. The sky screamed. Continents broke. Mountains fell. But when the smoke cleared, the laughter still echoed. From the ruins, green shapes rose again, waving crude banners. One of them looked up at the sky and bellowed, "Dat tickled!" That's how the galaxy remembers the Orks. Not through monuments or victories, but through the things that refuse to stay buried. There is no historian for their race, no archive of their deeds, yet their legend grows louder with every attempt to silence it. They are the inevitability of motion, the consequence of creation itself. Where there is light, there will be shadow. Where there is life, there will be orcs. The Eldar call them the galaxy's punishment. The Necrons call them weeds of flesh. The Tyranids ignore them, for even hunger cannot digest madness. And the Imperium, the grandest corpse ever built, calls them a nuisance, even as entire sectors vanish beneath their laughter. But somewhere in the warp, the truth is known. The Orks are not merely a species. They are the echo of war's first breath. When the universe cooled from creation, when stars first formed from fire and vacuum, something in the noise decided it wanted to hit something else. That impulse never died. It learned to laugh. It learned to grow teeth. Every great Waaagh eventually collapses. Every empire of green eventually eats itself alive. That, too, is part of the rhythm. When the fighting stops, the Orks grow restless. They turn on each other. Blood fills the soil again, and from it new spores rise. In the ruins of every dead Waaagh, another begins. It's not reincarnation. It's inevitability. On the dead world of Volkar's Reach, a lone orc once stood amid the bones of his fallen kin. The wind howled through shattered gargants. The sky was gray with ash. He looked around, scratched his head, and grinned. Bit quiet, innit? He picked up a rock and threw it at the horizon. The echo came back louder. He laughed. Dare we go? And somewhere beneath his feet, the ground began to stir. The Mechanicus once tried to measure the orc presence in the galaxy. The results were inconclusive because the numbers wouldn't stay still. They grew every time someone checked. Some believed the data was corrupted. Others knew better. You cannot measure eternity. You can only survive it. The Orks don't need strategy. They don't need hope. They don't even need cause. They exist because the universe requires something to keep it loud, to remind every god, demon, and emperor that stillness is just another kind of death. And maybe, deep within the Astronomican's dying light, the Emperor himself understands this. Maybe that's why he never tries to erase them completely. Because even he knows, without the Orks, the galaxy would go quiet. And quiet is worse than hell. So the Waaagh marches on, forever. Across the stars, through warp storms, over the bones of empires. The sound of its drums never stops. Sometimes it's loud, roaring through systems, smashing worlds. Sometimes it's faint, a heartbeat in forgotten ruins. But it's always there, waiting. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And war has a face, and it's green, and it's smiling. There are moments when even the stars seem tired of war. In the silence between systems, where light travels for centuries and never finds an ear to hear it, peace pretends to exist. But it is a lie, because somewhere, inevitably, there's laughter. Somewhere, an engine coughs to life. Somewhere, an orc shouts into the void just to make sure it still answers. That is the truth of the galaxy. It cannot stop moving. Every civilization that's ever tried to build peace has eventually found it unbearable. Stillness invites thought, thought invites fear, and fear invites fire. The Orks never made that mistake. They never tried to stop. To them, war is not tragedy. It's proof that the universe still breathes. In the dying light of the Segmentum Pacificus, a lone imperial world named Oron flickered beneath a red sun. The Administratum had declared it purged decades ago, its surface sterilized by bombardment. But orbiting augurs began to pick up movement. Heat blooms, laughter-shaped vox echoes, the pulse of engines no human hand had built. When the first transmission came through, it wasn't words. It was rhythm. A steady beat, rising and falling like breath. Then, through the static, "Oi, we's back." The Waaagh had returned. On Oron's surface, the air trembled with green light. Fungal spires pushed through rock like veins of metal. Whole valleys erupted into motion. Trucks forming themselves from scrap, guns fusing from soil and faith. And at the center of it all stood the new war boss, carved from belief and memory, larger than any before him. His name was lost to translation, but his voice shook continents. "We's gonna make the galaxy fun again," he bellowed, and the world answered with thunder. The Waaagh rose like a sunrise, blinding, impossible, eternal. In orbit, a small Imperial listening post monitored the event. Within hours, its vox arrays melted from overload. Before they failed completely, one final recording was transmitted back to Terra. The voice of a dying astropath whispered, "They aren't invading. They're singing." The sound of the Waaagh filled every channel. A wall of noise that bent instruments and cracked hulls. For a moment, the psychic chorus reached even the Astronomican. Across the Imperium, navigators felt the pulse, a green ripple spreading through the warp. Worlds burned. Some laughed, others went mad, and the Emperor, silent upon his throne, might have felt it too. the echo of a joy he could never allow himself. No scholar can say what the Orks want, because want implies lack. They lack nothing. They do not yearn. They do not regret. They are complete in their violence, pure in their purpose. Even their gods, Gork and Mork, are content to argue forever, their laughter fueling the storm. In the heart of that laughter lies a truth so terrible and perfect that only the Orks can bear it. There is no end to war because the universe does not want it to end. Every prayer for peace, every desperate act of defense, every last stand only feeds the cycle. Each act of defiance proves that struggle is the natural state of existence. The Orks are not the disease. They are the diagnosis. When the Inquisition finally reached Orin, it found something unprecedented. The Orks were not destroying the planet. They were reshaping it, building vast machines that churned the crust, seeding clouds with iron dust, redirecting lightning. They were turning the world into a drum. Every thunderclap was a heartbeat, every quake a rhythm. At the equator, they built a structure larger than mountains, a ring of metal and stone that glowed faintly in the dark. From orbit, it resembled an open mouth. The Orks called it Da Big Singa. When it activated, the sound it made wasn't mechanical. It was alive. The vibration rippled through the warp, awakening echoes on every orc-infested world across the galaxy. One by one, dormant spores stirred. Forgotten battlefields began to hum. The Waaagh was no longer a fleet or an army. It was a resonance. For the first time in history, Orks across light years fought the same battle, not against an enemy, but with reality itself. The psychic field that bound them swelled until it reached the edge of the galaxy, bending stars, twisting time. The Imperium's sensors failed. The warp screamed, and through it all, the Orks laughed. Every explosion, every death, every spark of chaos added to the rhythm. Entire systems vanished beneath the sound, and still it grew louder. The universe was vibrating itself apart, and yet it didn't feel like ending. It felt alive. Maybe this was what creation had always been meant to sound like. The Mechanicus later called it the final resonance, though nothing final followed. In the aftermath, the stars shone a little greener. Planets long thought dead began to bloom with strange new life. In places where no Orks had ever walked, spores grew anyway. The Waaagh had become immortal, not through flesh or faith, but through frequency. A hum woven into the structure of the cosmos. Even if every Ork vanished tomorrow, the echo would remain, waiting for something to remember the sound, and something always does. Centuries later, a lone servitor on a forgotten outpost recorded a faint vibration beneath the ice of an abandoned moon. It matched no known frequency, but the pattern was unmistakable. 3 beats, pause, then one more. A rhythm of war. The Mechanicus dissected the data for decades. They never found its source. Some said it was interference. Others whispered it was the laughter of gods sleeping inside the rock, dreaming of noise. In time, the Orks returned, drawn by instinct, by memory, by the universe's own heartbeat calling them home. The first of them clawed his way through the ice, blinking at the stars. He smiled. That was a good nap. He stood, stretched, and shouted into the void. "Oi, where's everyone gone? We's got fightin' to do." And somewhere, impossibly far away, the echo answered back. That is how the story ends. Not with silence, but with sound. The sound of endless war. The sound of laughter that outlasts gods, empires, and time itself. The Orks will never stop because they cannot. Because the galaxy itself refuses to be quiet. Because war is the only proof that anything ever lived at all. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no peace. There is no end. There is only the sound of Orks laughing in the smoke, and the eternal rhythm of the Waaagh. It never starts with a sound. Not really. The first sign is silence. That strange, heavy quiet that settles over a world like a held breath. Vox chatter falters. The hum of machines seems to thin. Birds vanish from the skies, and even the wind forgets how to move. Somewhere, far below the crust, something stirs. On the agri-world of Barathafor, the soil began to sweat weeks before the Orks came. Moisture gathered where there should have been dust. Crops twisted under a sun that burned hotter by the day, their roots splitting as if pushing against something beneath them. At first, the farmers prayed to the Emperor for rain. Then they prayed for death. In the manufactoria hives of the Imperium, silence is never a good sign. It means something vast is about to break. At the edges of the sector, auspex stations flickered with phantom readings, echoes of ships where none should be, gravitational distortions that came and went like breath. The Adeptus Mechanicus dismissed it as interference, but the astropaths whispered of something else. Laughter. Not human laughter. Low, booming, distant. Like the throat of a god trying to remember joy. No one took it seriously, not at first. The Imperium had a million wars burning already. What was one more rumor of green-skinned raiders on a backwater world? The Administratum stamped forms. The guard requisitioned ammunition. And the skies above Barroth remained clean and blue. Until the day they weren't. It began with a single falling star. A streak of light that tore through the firmament and vanished behind the mountains. Children pointed. Elders crossed themselves. But the next night there were 3, then 10, then 100. By dawn, the horizon was bruised with smoke, and the first screams reached the Vox. Something had landed. The local PDF called them meteors, but the fragments pulsed with unnatural green light. Tech priests sent to investigate found their auspex arrays melting, their robes wet with strange oil that bubbled from the craters. And in that bubbling mass, spores bloomed like fungus in time-lapse, growing, splitting, changing. The first orc didn't walk out of the crater. It grew out of it, a shape of muscle and noise, half born from soil and smoke, its skin still slick with embryonic muck. It blinked at the rising sun, squinted, and grinned with too many teeth. Then it picked up a piece of twisted metal and hit the nearest tech priest with it until the body stopped twitching. The sound it made wasn't speech. It was something older. The vibration of hunger turned into joy. More shapes followed. Dozens. Hundreds. The air filled with the smell of wet iron and burning oil. The orcs didn't march. They didn't plan. They emerged. A contagion of will. A storm that didn't need a sky. By the time the first Imperial forces arrived, Barroth IV was already half lost. The forests were alive with green shadows. The cities glowed at night with the light of looted promethium. Vox recordings captured snippets of chaos. Laughter mixed with screaming. Gunfire drowned out by chanting voices. Waaagh! 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 The sound carried for kilometers. It wasn't just noise. It was pressure, psychic and physical. A pulse that made hearts stutter and lights flicker. Some humans swore the sound lived inside their heads, vibrating behind their eyes until they vomited blood. Medica units called it combat psychosis. The astropaths knew better. They called it the first breath of the Waaagh. To the orcs, it wasn't an invasion. It was a festival. Every shot fired, every explosion, every scream. These were their hymns. They built weapons out of wreckage, welded armor from tractor parts, and named each new monstrosity with childish pride. This one shoots redder. That one goes boomier. Oi, gimme that spiky bit. Looks killy. Theirs was creation through chaos. They didn't build to last. They built to laugh, and the laughter spread. Even before Imperial reinforcements arrived, the orcs had already begun fighting each other. Arguments over loot, over who killed who, over who got to ride the biggest truck. But to them, it wasn't division. It was rhythm. Violence was the glue that held them together. Every punch, every explosion, every roar knitted the mob tighter. By the time the Astra Militarum landed, the orcs were ready. Colonel Verdun of the 81st Harrowborn remembered the smell before the sight. A mix of fungus, burnt metal, and something that reminded him of sweat soaked into stone. He led 3 regiments into the northern valleys, disciplined, armored, and already doomed. The enemy wasn't hiding. The enemy never hid. He saw them first as silhouettes against the firelight, huge shapes moving with impossible speed, banners made of skin fluttering behind them. Their weapons glowed with crude energy, sparking with static fields that shouldn't have worked but did. When the first bolter volley struck, the orcs didn't break formation. They cheered. When the tanks fired, they laughed louder. And when the first line of guardsmen fell, trampled beneath the green tide, Colonel Verdun realized what kind of war this truly was. There was no strategy to defeat them, only survival long enough to be remembered. Above the battlefield, orbiting auspex drones captured images that baffled Imperial tacticians. The orcs' advance was not linear. It was chaotic, looping, full of sudden turns and internal skirmishes. Yet somehow the front always expanded outward. It was as if the Waaagh had its own invisible geometry, a pulse that grew stronger the more it fed on itself. Every time an orc died, 3 more grew from the soil days later. Every time a city burned, the smoke carried spores across the continent. War was their biology. Their laughter was contagion. Weeks passed. The planet screamed, and the skies turned green. The void above Barroth filled with crude ships stitched together from scrap and miracle. The orcs had reached space. They didn't know how they'd done it, and they didn't care. Their fleet rose like rusted gods, thrusters spitting debris, their hulls painted with crude symbols of victory. One mech boy, interviewed posthumously by a bewildered inquisitorial team, once said, "Dunno how we did it, boss. Just felt right. We wanted to go up, so we did. Faith through madness. Logic through laughter. The Orks' version of divinity." By the time the Imperium declared exterminatus protocols, Baroth was gone. The orbiting fleet rained fire, reducing cities to glass and oceans to steam. But the ground below didn't stop moving. The firestorms fed the spores. In the ashes, something green began to grow again. Even death was fertilizer. And somewhere, far across the void, other worlds felt the tremor. Whispers in the warp. Laughter under the static of the Astronomicon. The sound of war before it begins. Because the Orks are never coming. They are already here. The first truth of the Orks is that they are not born. They happen. To a human mind, that's blasphemy. Life without lineage. Flesh without a womb. But on 1,000 worlds across the galaxy, Orks bloom like weeds after rain. There is no ceremony, no creation, no mother or father. There is only the soil, wet with blood and ash. And from it, something stirs. If you were to walk the wastelands after a Waaagh has passed, you would find the ground soft and green. You'd think it moss or mold until you notice it breathing. Spores the size of dust motes drift in the air, unseen but alive, seated by the dead. And where they land, life begins again, crude, hungry, and loud. The Orks are not individuals. They are a single organism, scattered across 1,000,000 planets, dreaming the same dream. Each spore is a memory. Each new Ork a repetition. They are continuity given muscle and laughter. The Waaagh does not end because the Waaagh is the Orks. Under a rust-colored sky on the world of Garuth's Reach, the cycle began again. It started small. A cluster of pale fungal nodes growing in a crater filled with rainwater and oil. Within hours, they swelled and split, oozing out shapes that twitched and growled before they even knew what they were. Arms formed, fists clenched, teeth grew like crystals through gum. When the rain stopped, the first Ork stood up. He looked around at the dead battlefield, sniffed the air, and grinned. "Smells fighty." Language came naturally, not learned but remembered. The syntax of war was already carved into his bones. Around him, more forms crawled out of the muck, each shouting nonsense that somehow made sense. Within minutes, there was argument. Within hours, there was violence. By nightfall, there was an army. No scholar of the Imperium can fully explain how such biology is possible. The Magos biologist who tried to dissect a live specimen once wrote, "Every cell is a weapon, every organ a generator. Their blood is half oil, half chlorophyll. They photosynthesize rage. Orks do not eat in the way other species do. They absorb, metabolize, and adapt. Their muscle fibers are denser than ceramite, yet their bodies heal faster than a Medici vat-born subject. Their bones grow around bullets. Their skin thickens where blades have struck before. Each injury becomes instruction, a lesson written into tissue. And the strangest part, they get stronger when surrounded by their own kind. This is no metaphor. The more Orks gather, the more reality itself bends to accommodate them. Guns that should jam fire perfectly. Machines that shouldn't function roar to life. Theories collapse under the weight of belief. It is as though the universe recognizes their will, and, for reasons no one dares to name, obeys. There's an old Mechanicus legend, told in static whispers, of a Magos who tried to isolate the Orkoid genome. He worked in orbit over a dead moon, far from any life, inside a sealed lab lined with wards and cogitators. He wanted to understand how the Orks existed, how something so primitive could defy every law of nature. He found it. He called it the green resonance. It was not DNA. It was not code. It was something older, a psychic echo embedded in matter itself. Every Ork carried a sliver of it, a frequency that resonated with others of its kind. When enough Orks gathered, the frequency harmonized, shaping the world around them. When the Magos realized what it meant, he purged his data and immolated himself. His last message, transmitted in a burst of static, read, "They do not adapt to reality. Reality adapts to them. The Orks don't need purpose. They are purpose. Every part of them, from the smallest Gretchen to the towering knob, exists to sustain the machine of war. The Gretchens scurry, tinker, and die in droves. Their purpose is to feed the bigger ones. Squigs, living weapons, food, and tools, fill every ecological niche, a self-sustaining army of teeth and instinct. To the Orks, this isn't biology. It's religion. They believe they were meant to fight, that the galaxy itself was built as an endless arena, and they were the only species wise enough to enjoy it. A weird boy once said, his eyes glowing with warp light as his head threatened to burst. "Fightin's what makes the stars stay shiny. Stop fightin' and everything goes dark." No one laughed. They all agreed. To human observers, this looks like chaos. But to the Orks, there's a pattern, a logic born from violence. When they gather, they form tribes. When tribes grow, they merge into clans. And when enough clans shout the same chant, a Waaagh begins. But this is not organization. It's resonance, a biological song that compels every Ork to join in. A field of shared emotion, a tide of unity born from noise. The louder they fight, the stronger they become. The stronger they become, the louder they fight. It is feedback without end, creation through destruction. The flesh of the Waaagh is not just Ork skin and bone. It is belief made visible. On Gareth's Reach, as the new horde rose, something remarkable occurred. A mech boy, half-formed and still dripping mud, picked up a piece of broken metal and began hammering. The sound was rhythmic, clanging, echoing through the valley. Others gathered watching. They didn't know what he was building, and neither did he. But the act of building felt right. When he was done, there stood a crude, jagged contraption. A gun far too big for any hand, made from parts that didn't fit. He pulled the trigger. The gun fired. Not once, not twice. Continuously, spitting shells, lightning and laughter. "See?" he yelled. "Told you it'd work!" It shouldn't have. The wires weren't connected. The chamber was sealed. The fuel tank was empty. But the Orks believed it worked. And so it did. That belief shapes everything they touch. Their vehicles move because they think they should. Their armor stops bullets because it looks strong. Their ships fly because no one told them they couldn't. To an Ork, faith and physics are the same thing. This is the secret horror of their existence. That the universe itself validates their madness. That somewhere beneath the surface of logic, the cosmos prefers laughter and war to silence and peace. Because the Orks never ask permission. They simply exist, and the universe, perhaps too afraid to argue, lets them. Across Gareth's Reach, the new Waaagh continued to grow. The ground pulsed with life. Fungus forests turned into workshops. Squigs evolved into living weapons, some exploding, others howling, others sprouting metal plates. Everything the Orks needed was simply there, waiting to be used. A weird boy climbed atop a mound of scrap and looked at the horizon. His skull sparked with green lightning, veins glowing with psychic fire. In his mind, he heard the pulse of a million others like him, scattered across the stars, laughing, fighting, remembering. He grinned. His teeth shone like blades. "Oi, we's alive again!" And the world roared in agreement. The flesh of the Waaagh is eternal. It cannot be starved, burned, or reasoned with. It does not learn because it never forgets. It only grows. And somewhere deep beneath the galaxy's endless ruin, something laughs. Not cruelly, not joyfully, but knowingly. Because war, in its purest form, needs no master. It only needs to be fed.